Hey, this is Christian Buckley doing another MVP Buzz Chat, and I'm talking today with Pat. Hey, Pat.
Hey Christian, thanks for having me today.
I know you're long time SharePoint community person, first time MVP, new MVP. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
So, for folks that don't know you, who are you, where are you, and what do you do?
Cool. Yeah. So Pat McGown, I am the co-founder of an organization, Cloudwell, headquartered out of the Washington D.C. metro area, and I really have evolved my entire career around the SharePoint space. 22 years plus, you know, building customizations on top of SharePoint
First version
migrations.
is so. What version was that for folks?
Yeah, so that was way back in the WSS days. I even remember what was it, content management server.
Yeah.
So like going way back when, and some of the early customizations were like layering Macromedia Flash as a web part, with a data service, feeding data into that. So super cool.
Yeah.
Way
Very high
back
tech.
when.
Yes.
Yeah, very right.
Yeah.
Not a hack at all. But
Yeah.
yeah. So, but now more recently, really blogging and speaking a lot about SharePoint Premium and a lot of those new features that are coming to the market. So that's been really fun to just dig into and peel back the layers. Kind of having a foundational background in SharePoint, seeing how things like autofill columns and content assembly can really just like add to the efficiency for organizations, big and small.
Yeah. It's been exciting because I think we got involved around the same time. Like my first deployment of SharePoint back in that era was in 2005,
Hmm.
and then I joined Microsoft a year later. It's funny, and I advised that client against going with SharePoint, and then they
Hmm.
insisted. I deployed it. I kind of caught the vision of what it that Microsoft was doing, and it kind of switched directions there. But yeah, so it's man, a lot has changed in that time.
Those were the days, right, when it was, you really heard it every time, like, can we make SharePoint not look like SharePoint, right? Like, and that was it. And that's what was really cool way back when, back in those early versions of SharePoint, like getting customizations in there, like having to deal with the GAC and like all of that stuff. And where I was working, we were doing stuff for the federal government, Department of Defense. So we were basically building servers that could get drop shipped like in the field in the Middle East, like in war zones that had, like the I mentioned Macromedia Flash. We were doing I built like a radar map that one of our former Army Rangers that was leading the practice like had this idea. And so we built a radar map that would map hostile and friendly incidents, right, red and blue on a map, in the war zones. And that was really cool. We did some stuff for the Army with that. Yeah, and that's really where it started for me. So,
Yeah,
but
and
yeah.
most people don't know that about the history with SharePoint. I mean, part of its history of, and I'm sure it was in part of the vision, but there was a group called HMC, which is the Hosted Messaging and Collaboration, that was like an extension of the small to medium business team organization at Microsoft that was putting Exchange and SharePoint on servers and then selling that bundle, packaging and selling that to MSPs or companies, and but a lot of that was, again, this is all on-prem stuff, and which is again part of the rich history of SharePoint. SharePoint was the viral, unsupported, unofficial solution that admins would set up on their server sitting under their desk and not tell people go build
Hmm.
solutions without permission from IT. And then suddenly it was, that a CEO would see it and be like, I want more of that thing. That's awesome. Let's do more of that. And IT was then forced to go and expand. That's not every scenario. That was just fairly common scenario.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, totally. And it
Exciting.
was it was great to see it evolve too, because it started with like you had a site, right? And you had a document library. You had some like lists, like little contact lists or like the ability to customize a list. And then it just evolved, right? Then the publishing platform got layered in there. What was that in 2010? Was it 2010 version? I think that was it 2007 when they brought in the publishing components to SharePoint, if you recall that. So it
Well,
allowed
I
you to
mean, it all
basically like,
evolved with 2010. I mean, there was some stuff in 2007, but yeah, so a 2010
mhm,
where, I mean, that's it for most people. Again, like the 2010 version was like a band suddenly hitting mainstream. You know, they were an
mhm.
indie band that no one had heard of playing cafes. That was SharePoint. That
It
was
got a completely
cool in the
refreshed
background,
look. Like,
right?
yeah, totally, totally.
And
Yeah. So
suddenly
that was,
they landed a major record contract and were on every radio station. That was 2010.
yep, exactly. And now you're building intranets on top of it. You weren't just building like document management solutions. Yeah, it really started to evolve. You know, you had the workflow engine in the background. I mean, it opened the door to so many more opportunities when that happened. So it was really, really cool.
I have to ask you, so as a consultant, as a company, like what versions are you still running into? Like how old? Like 2010 is almost like, when you go into like a grocery store and there's something going on with the computer and you look and they're running on, like XP still,
Right, right.
that device. Like, are you still seeing 2010 SharePoint out there, or is it more 2013 or 2016?
Mostly 2016 now, and then I think was just driven obviously by like end of life, right? Support
Yep.
for 2013. So we still do come across some 2016. I'll tell you, we did recently do a migration from 2019 to SharePoint subscription,
Hmm.
and man, was that a bear. SharePoint subscription, while I understand the reason that it's still around, and people want to continue to host their SharePoint environments, you have to write a lot of code if you're going to try and basically bring a migration from one of those other previous versions into it, because yes, you get a version of a modern experience, but it is not one that is anywhere near what's in SharePoint Online. So those are
Yeah.
those are difficult, I
Yeah.
would say.
It's funny, I did research and it was mostly funded by Microsoft a few years back, looking at, how big the footprint is of on-prem still in the SharePoint world. And it was interesting to do that study. And Microsoft was even surprised by some of the results of that research of
Hmm.
how, and they realized, and that was when, I'm trying to remember the year, 2017, there were all these rumors out there that Microsoft is shutting down SharePoint. It was never true. It was never
Right,
true.
right,
But they
right.
just weren't emphasizing SharePoint as much as they were focusing more on the online stuff. And I guess specifically the on-prem side of things was it's going to be shut down. And Microsoft came out and said, we will keep providing new versions of SharePoint on-prem as long as customers are still buying it. Like, and it's net new installs of on-prem SharePoint is still happening. There are
Hmm.
valid reasons why, and company doesn't need to provide a reason why they don't trust the cloud or they can't for whatever reason.
Hmm.
And so it's still out there, it's still a thing. And so I don't know the latest dates. Have you heard when there's supposed to be another? I don't know if it's anything official. We have to be
I
careful with
don't know.
MVPs. We may have heard
Yeah.
things that aren't yet out there, but the timing of there's a new version that's supposed to be coming out of on-prem. So yeah, it's
Right.
every 3 to 5 years there'll be another version of the on-prem. They'll
Hmm.
figure out
Hmm.
which of the new online features that need to be there or make sense and or even possible in the on-prem, move it over and then move out a new version of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they do like there's like I think they do like H1, H2 updates right now for
Yeah.
that subscription. And to be honest with you, like I don't think anybody misses, going through the old PS config, for on-prem, right? Like that's such
Yeah.
a benefit of online. But again, understand our customers' needs, right? And if that's the environment they need to keep, we have to support it. So I guess it keeps you honest, right? From a foundational SharePoint perspective, it keeps you honest and brings you back to your roots of like what it was like to own a SharePoint environment or manage a SharePoint environment, not just through the admin center, you know?
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's an interesting space. We have a colorful history of that, and someone's going to write a book someday of just the history behind that, and it'll have literally dozens of sales. But so, what was your path to becoming an MVP? I mean, you've been in and around the space for a long time. Why have you not been an MVP for a long time?
Yeah. So path to becoming an MVP, and while I've been around, like I said, 22 years plus, and around a lot of MVPs in my career. My path was really it was due in large part to a commitment with investing back in the community a couple of years ago. My organization is 12 years old. We really focused the first 10 years to just, set the foundational, structure of the business, bring some apps to market, and we got in a great spot where we decided that we really wanted to shift our focuses a bit back into the community. And so that started with sponsoring some events. Then we spoke at a few events, very much active in our local DC user group community, and I try to speak, on topics that I blog about over there. Um, but I think it was really just putting myself out there, learning from other MVPs, connecting with MVPs, connecting with, Microsoft, product team folks in the spaces that I'm, operating in, writing about my experiences, diving deep into, these new SharePoint, advanced content management and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you do that, you get recognized pretty quickly if your content, has substance behind it. And that's what I really tried to write about and speak about, is content with substance, like tools and opportunities that will help organizations be efficient in their workflow. Like as a small business with a global reach, for our apps and services customers, we've had to learn how to evolve and how to be efficient. And if you're efficient with your workflow and the tools you're using, you can support a big base of customers and big groups. So you can be small and absolutely very much do that.
It's always interesting, and having been part of the user group for years here, and when I was in Seattle for years before that. So I've been sitting on user group board since 2009 or 2010 I think, officially. So last 14 years. And then I did stuff decade earlier than that as well, with user groups. But having put on SharePoint Saturday events across the Western US and all of that, I find myself all the time kind of going and explaining from, a sponsor perspective, like why get involved. We actually developed, and I was surprised that so many other events didn't do something similar. We created like a really low cost, like a $200 sponsorship, just to have your logo on the site and on the slides. And it was more of like, I get it, you can't come out and be at the event, but we still need support. I mean, hey, 10
Yep.
companies throwing $200 at us, $2,000 is huge chunk of our budget. I think it costs us like $10,000-$12,000 to put on our
community event like that.
With all the overhead. And that's bare minimums, nothing flashy.
No one's getting paid at those events. Yeah,
nobody's getting paid. Right. You get a free lunch there at the event, kind of thing. But so trying to position that for sponsors, it's kind of like what you and I were talking about before we started recording about the community activities, is you can't always expect that I'm going to get something directly out of being involved in that community activity. But every time you're involved in that community activity, there are people that get something out of that benefits. And it's one of those, a rising tide floats all boats. Like, it's good for all of us that there is a community here. I know. So I don't know if you have, like, what's your perspective? Do you have to feel like, pull teeth, twist arms to get sponsors to get involved with things? Do they, like, how do you make that story of why get involved in the community?
Well, and that's it. So, like, I've got both perspectives, right? That's perspective as a sponsor, and then perspective of trying to get sponsors. As a sponsor, you make your decision based on, like, the number of attendees, the audience, what's in it for my organization? Is the exposure worth it? Is there a speaking opportunity where we can kind of speak about our services? There's a lot of different things that you have to consider when making that decision as a sponsor. And it can be difficult sometimes. And, like, there are organizations, mid to large size consulting organizations, like, that have speakers regularly at these events, but the organization, like, doesn't believe in sponsoring, right? And I'm like, if you, like, an organization, like, we're a small organization, and like, we do try to give back to the community and sponsor these events because we understand how far $1,000, $2,000 goes. and we're lucky enough to be able to afford, something like that. But why a larger organization where that's just like nothing? That's a drop in the bucket for them from a cost perspective that they don't, invest in it. I just can't. I can't understand that. But those are the sponsors that can and should really be sponsoring these sorts of events. It goes so far, for the community, and you're right. Like you don't. It's very hard to correlate a sale that happened at a conference or an event, right? Like unless you like scan a tag and someone signs right up for your services or buys your app on site, I mean, we've seen it where it's plus a year out where someone comes back around and they're like, all right, we saw it, we put it in next year's budget. It's now next year and we're ready to go. Right. Like it's hard to qualify it. Right.
Yeah.
But it does happen.
Yeah.
You can see that exposure, which is important.
Well, yeah, that's again, not just on this point that especially if you're a company, because I've seen the same thing where you, again, like maybe one or two people, your employees are speaking at this event. They're doing it on their time. It's, a
Yeah.
lot of these are on Saturdays, so it's their time away from family and the time then in the evenings that they're spending building the content, preparing for that. Um,
Hmm.
and as a company, I mean, you can selfishly look at it and say, hey, we want to sponsor just because we want to also then get benefit out of our people there. We want to get mentioned in the bio. We want to,
Right.
maybe be there to talk to the local community. Like it doesn't make sense to me why more companies aren't trying to be aware of what's happening in community around them and then getting involved.
Yep. And furthermore, what it does to the speaker, right? To your employee, to know for the employee to know that you've got the support of your organization, right? And they're backing you, whether it's financially or from like a social channel marketing or something, like for you as a person, like you're investing back in the employee when you support that. I think
Yeah.
that's very important.
Right. Not all rewards that you give employees has to be, compensation based. There's having the
Correct.
recognition around that, and the support is huge.
Hmm.
So one of the things that I always warn new MVPs is that, when you're answering a question, you really have to think like, did I hear that in an NDA call that I can't talk about, or was that a public thing? And so sometimes I feel like I'm slower to respond to a question, even like online. I need to go and check and say, is that public yet? Can I talk about that? Because we might hear about things which
Hmm.
then get delayed for a year that aren't part of it. So yeah, you've got to be very careful. But having said all that, is there anything that is public roadmap stuff that's coming up that you're really excited about or that was recently announced?
Yes. And it's a very good point, right? Like we're lucky, number one, to become an MVP, based on our contributions. And then, that allows us to be privy to a lot of this early information, right? But yes, like what can we share versus what can't we share? Like I actually was just meeting with the SharePoint e-signature team the other day.
Hmm.
And, a couple of things came up, stuff that's roadmap, and announced, and stuff that they want to wait for the right time to announce, but it's been
Yep.
in discussions. Um, Speaking of e-signature, I think that's one that I actually am pretty excited about, just because now obviously e-signature is not a new technology, right? But it's a new technology, a part of SharePoint. And what I love about the kind of the conversation around e-signature, recently being GA'd, is that for organizations who maybe don't necessarily have e-signature capabilities today, but are considering it, it's a great cost-effective option for you. And if it's got the basic e-signature capability of like, the signature behind it, and you can trust it, right?
Mhm.
It's not technically today, like you can't one-to-one compare it with DocuSign or Adobe Sign. And I'll be honest, like we use those tools as well, right? We have been customers of both of those e-signatures solutions in the past. And those have evolved over years, right? Like, and so like you've got just baked into it sequential signing and like any field type, and you can send it to anybody. But the reality of it is, with SharePoint's e-signature, not only is it cost effective, like $2 per signature, I think, and you even get like some free free trial credits, between now and next year. So take advantage of that if you haven't, right? And if you're considering. But the security layer, I mean, if you think about what you're doing with tools like DocuSign and Adobe Sign, you're taking like potential, documents that are potentially like include your intellectual property or need to be, they're highly sensitive with financials and et cetera. And you're putting them out there and you're trusting DocuSign's platform or Adobe's platform to secure that. But with SharePoint eSignature, it's on your platform that you've got all of the necessary security guardrails and protocols in place. So those documents never leave your tenancy. And I think that's such an added benefit to it. So I am excited about that one. And I think that advocating and kind of making people aware of what the opportunity is there is important. So
yeah, it's funny you look at this stuff like I mean, even put some ways Copilot stuff for into this category of things where there's a lot where you might say it was like, well, is Microsoft really innovating across the board?
Right.
They are in a lot of different areas, and other things you're like,
Yep.
oh, this has been out there in mainstream, things like signatures.
Yeah.
Have been out there for a long time. It's like, yeah, but what Microsoft does really well is like in the enterprise, in consideration of your your SharePoint environment, your lockdown secure environment, and how do I open up a window into this agreement with these people securely, get the signatures, keep it, retain that information without putting it out on a third-party site out on the web somewhere where it could be hacked or whatever it is.
Right.
But yeah, it's great to see these. I think sometimes the incremental ads, these little features, little side things are like, why are you spending time on that? Like that has huge impact.
Yeah. And I think like autofill columns too, if we think about that, and you're a historical SharePoint person, so you'll get this, like the importance of your information architecture and metadata. I mean, like, for the 2 billion documents per day that are getting added to Microsoft 365, like what percentage of that is actually getting, appropriate metadata applied to it? Probably not a lot. So then you're trusting Copilot to just like pick it up, based on content within. Whereas like if you take advantage of something like an autofill column that can do that for you, I think you're only going to be, enhancing your content management and information architecture posture. So I think it's great, and you can do so much more with it too. It's not just about applying generative AI metadata. Like obviously you have to review it, so it's going to be tough to handle that at scale. I'm sure we'll find ways to improve that experience. But then because it's a column on a library, like you've got your list view formatting, and so now you can visualize your documents and your data sets like in a whole new experience. So it's really like a full circle conversation I like to talk about and explain, like really take advantage of these new features, or at least explore them.
Yeah, well, pilot always. But it's just funny. I mean, this whole topic, the fact that you're bringing this up, talking about that's like, this is my original topic was around metadata and then larger information architecture, which is stuff that I was doing back in my IBM days, and information management, back in the mid 90s was around, again, the verbiage and the technology, underlying technology have changed, but the principles of knowledge management and what we need to go and do and make that accessible, searchable, findable in your systems and useful later. I mean, it goes back to my, my database management, days back in the early 90s. So yeah, important topics out there. Well, Pat, I know we've gone over the time a little bit here, but one thing I always like to ask for folks that want to find you, reach out to you, where are you most active in social? Where can people find and engage with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm both on X, formerly known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. I'm active and engaged on both. LinkedIn is my preferred. I find that to just be the preferred channel to communicate in. But yeah, either one is fine. So feel free to reach out to me, please.
Excellent. And we'll have, of course, those links out on the blog out on buckleyplanet.com, as well as out on YouTube attached to the video, so you can find them and reach out and connect. And we'll have a link to his MVP profile as well and his company and all that kind of stuff. So, well, Pat, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, likewise, Christian. Thanks again for having me. Take it easy.